Sorry this video is taking so long to get out. I've been grinding a paycheck IRL. I work Thursdays through Sundays, 4 10-hour graveyard shifts. The upside of that is that I get 3 days off in a row, but I normally spend the first day sleeping to recover, so I really only get about 2 days worth of WoW out of the week. Thanks again to everyone who subscribed, and thanks for your patience in waiting for the video. Alright, the main question I get from everyone is for me to explain my frost spec. So here it is. It seems for some reason there are a lot of mages out there asking me why I don't stack int and haste like the rest of them, so I hope this video will adequately explain that. To begin with, we'll go over basic stats needed for any mage PvP spec. For those of you new to the mage class or even new to the game, it should be very informative, and for those of you with more experience both with mage class and the game, I hope you will find it a pleasant review. You get your stats from gear, so think of this as the gear portion of the tutorial. Hit chance should be close to max as possible because you don't want any of your spells to miss. When you mouse over your hit chance, you will see there are other levels listed. The higher levels are for PvE only, so concern yourself with just the first tier because that's the level of other players. Spell penetration reduces the chance your spells are resisted. There are a lot of buffs that give resistances, such as Mark of the Wild, Mage Armor, and the Paladin Aura. The most resistance granted is from the Paladin Aura, which gives 195 resist. So when I say spell pen capped, I'm talking about having enough spell penetration to negate that aura. I feel it's really important to meet these two stat caps first because nothing can be more frustrating in the middle of combat than having a crucial spell resisted or missed. There are 3 primary stats for a PvP frost spec: resilience, crit, and mastery. You obviously want resilience because you don't want to get one shot. While I was gearing up, I found anything under 2k and you're still squishy, but it wasn't until my resilience hit about 2500 that I started to become satisfied with it. Mastery for Frost increases your damage against frozen targets. The damage amplification from stacking Mastery I've found is higher than if you stacked Intellect for the Frost spec. Finally, there's Crit. This stat helps you with the big burst damage that mages are known for. The interesting thing about the Mage PvP set is that it doesn't really facilitate a frost spec. There are a lot of Mage PvP items that have haste, and I've ended up reforging it to get either Mastery or Crit. So with that in mind, the trick is to figure out what PvE items are worth the decrease to your resilience for the increase in damage. With that last thought in mind, I'm going to use my gear as an example and explain my reasoning behind taking what items I have, and hopefully you can apply the same thought process when deciding what items you're going to take in a battle. I'm using the Epic PvP Helm. The head enchant is from Wrath because I haven't had a chance to grind up my Guardians of Hyjal rep yet. My metagem is a Chaotic Shadow Spirit Diamond. It's very conducive to the frost spec because most of the damage you do comes from crits. I've gemmed it with an Artful Ember Topaz to get my socket bonus, and it counts as one of the red gems I need to activate my meta. For my neck, I'm using the Epic Caster reward from being exalted with Wildhammer Clan. I've decided to sacrifice the 119 resilience I can get from either of the Mage Honor neck pieces because the rep reward increases Mastery and Crit without having to be reforged. Conversely, if I was to take the Spell Penetration Honor piece, I would also have to use a gem slot to reach Spell Pen Cap. My shoulders are gemmed for Mastery and have the Tolbarad PvP enchant on them. I'm taking this cloak because it allows me to reach Spell Pen Cap on one item without having to use a gem slot. I also have it enchanted for Crit. My chest is gemmed with another Artful Ember Topaz to get my metagem activated, and I reforged the Crit to Mastery to increase my top end damage against frozen targets. I've got the Crit enchant on my bracers. Again, it's more beneficial than the spell power one because of the Mastery for Frost. For my gloves, here again, I've decided to sacrifice resilience in order to increase the 2 other primary stats considerably. I took the Mastery enchant and my Engineering Intellect enchant, so it's pretty obvious why I've chosen to miss out on that resilience. For the belt, I'm not worried about the socket bonus because the Mastery gems more than make up for a measly 10 Intellect. I also put the Mind Control Engineering enchant on it, and we'll have more on that later. I've reforged the haste for Mastery on my pants, and also have it socketed with the final red gem to activate my meta. I have another Mastery gem socketed for additional damage. The minor speed increase on my boots makes a big difference against melee classes because they all seem to have it and you don't want melee classes overtaking you while you're kiting them. I reforged the Crit to Mastery for more damage. For this ring, I reforged the hit to Mastery again for more damage. The same with the Crit on the other ring. Right now I'm using this Stump of Time from Tolbarad because it lets me take a nice chunk of hit and gives me a spell power proc bonus. Here again I'm missing out on some resilience, but so far I've found the trade-off works well for me. As a human I have every man for himself, so I can double up on my trinkets. Here is just the standard honor trinket that has an activated spell power buff. Spell power and the intellect enchant on my main hand and offhand. I've reforged the crit and mastery across the board for all of my weapons. Here are the results for my base stats with my gear unbuffed. I'm at 2800 resilience, 11.54 mastery, and 15.44% chance to crit. Spell penetration is also capped, and I'm a 1/10% away from being hit capped. That's close enough for me. Now for the talent section. I'll start off by selecting and explaining what I feel to be indispensable talents for a PvP Frost spec. Then we'll branch out into variations you can go after that, and discuss the pros and cons of each. Beginning with primary talents, we'll start off with Shatter, which multiplies the critical strike chance against frozen targets by 3, and 20% extra damage with Frostbolt against those frozen targets. We'll take Piercing Ice, which adds an additional 3% crit, Improved Cone of Cold that freezes the target for 4 seconds. It's great because most of the damage from Frost only happens when the target is frozen. Ice Flows for obvious reasons. Permafrost for me, it's not because of the additional snare, but the reduction against your target's healing. Icy Veins again for obvious reasons, and for another that I'll get to shortly. Fingers of Frost all the way, first for the extra damage, and second, when the proc is up you aren't dependent on the target being frozen. Improved Freeze because it allows your pet's ranged Nova spell to give 2 stacks of Fingers of Frost on demand whenever you need it. Cold Snap, obviously. Brain Freeze, I'll explain soon. Ice Barrier for damage mitigation, and 2 points in Frostfire Orb. By placing the points here, every time Frostfire Orb does damage, you have a chance to get the Fingers of Frost proc off of those ticks. So right now we're at 26 points in Frost, and we obviously need to get Defreeze. Here is the spec I'm currently running with. I've taken 2 in Enduring Winter, which at first glance might seem like a PvE talent, but in a moment I'll go over the glyphs and how abilities stack, and you'll see why I've chosen it. I've also put 2 points in Shattered Barrier because it's simply another way to freeze your target and get the benefit from your Frost Mastery. In Fire I've taken Master of Elements, Burning Soul, Blazing Speed, and Impact. Here are my current glyphs and how all these abilities stack together. The first prime glyph I've taken is Molten Armor. So remember I was at 15.44% chance to crit. Now with a glyphed Molten Armor buff it's over 20%. It also stacks with Piercing Ice for an additional 3%. And now Shatter, which multiplies my crit chance against frozen targets by 3, I'm actually sitting at 70.32% chance to crit against frozen targets. The downside to running around with Molten Armor is that you burn through your mana rather quickly. To mitigate that, I have Master of Elements, so every crit will refund 30% of its base mana cost, combined with the 6% mana cost reduction of Enduring Winter, as well as the 1% mana regen proc it grants. This saves me from having to stop DPS and using a mana gem or evocating to get my mana back. The other 2 prime glyphs I have is Ice Lance and Frost Firebolt. The extra damage I get from the Frost Firebolt glyph is at the cost of Frost Firebolt not snaring the target, but I find this is an easy trade-off to make because as a Frost Mage you have plenty of other ways to snare a target. Let's take a quick break from all this information and demonstrate how it all comes together. This is my Guildmaster and Threes partner Realm. My other Threes partner is my girlfriend Liliqui. Our rating isn't the best yet because we're still getting her DK, a full set of PvP gear. But once we finish that up, we'll give arenas a more serious attempt than this trying to win the minimum amount of games for our conquest points. For this demonstration, instead of a target dummy, which is mainly for PvE, I'm going to use Realm. As a paladin, he has almost 3,400 resilience, and I've asked him to put up his resistance aura, so he's at 195 spell resist. We'll start off with Frostbolt. I'll freeze him in place with Nova to get the mastery benefit, and as you can see it crits him for 20k damage. Next we'll try out Glyphed Frost Firebolt. Again he's frozen in place to get the mastery benefit, and it crits for almost as much as a Frostbolt. This gets even better when Brain Freeze procs, because then it's an instant cast. Here's the damage Ice Lance can do. Again he's frozen, and Ice Lance crits for 12.6k. I got an impact proc off on that. Normally it's best to save it for an interrupt, but this is just a demonstration. Here I'm going to hit him with Ice Lance, but he isn't frozen, so not only does Ice Lance not benefit from mastery, but its overall damage is reduced by an additional 40%. Here is a good spell combo demonstration on doing burst damage. I'll open up with my pet's Range Nova that grants me 2 Fingers of Frost procs, and it freezes my target in place. I'll cast Frostbolt, so it will get the Shatter benefit from the Range Nova. It crits, breaking the Nova, but now I use Ice Lance that benefits from my 2 Fingers of Frost procs. Unfortunately, the first one doesn't crit, but I do get my Spell Power proc off my trinket from it. My next Ice Lance, with Fingers of Frost, does crit, this time with the Spell Power proc buff for a nice chunk of damage. To finish the glyphs up, for major tier you'll want Evocation to get your HP back, Ice Barrier for damage mitigation, and the glyph Icy Veins lets you get out of another snare and you can even cold snap it. For the minor tier you'll want Arcane Brilliance. This really helps if it gets purged off because it's a pretty big hit to your spell power, so this assists in recasting it. Does anybody else remember farming Light Feathers in Westfall? I'm so glad we don't have to do that anymore with the Slowfall glyph. I'm actually running out of time, so unfortunately I have to be a little more brief than I'd like to be for variations on this spec. Mainly, I'd like to discuss improved counterspell. To improve counterspell, or not to improve counterspell? That is the question. If you interrupt someone with counterspell, you silence them. The recent patch brought this down from 8 seconds to 7 seconds, but there's still a difference of 3 seconds to consider. My personal preference is not to take it. I find Deep Freeze and Impact stuns more than make up for it, but your situation might be different. Your latency is a huge factor. If you get some bad lag, improved counterspell can help out a lot. You'll also want to base your decision depending on who your arena partners are. They might already have a silence that can be used instead of you having to spend the talent points on it, but you might need to take it still if you want to chain silence while bursting down a target in arenas. Effectively switching between the 3 types of spell armor can really make a difference. By default, especially when expecting world PvP, just run around with mage armor. This way, if you get jumped, you're guaranteed to have most of your mana unspent and ready for the fight. Use mage armor against shadow priests and locks because of the dot duration reduction. You want to use frost armor against melee like DKs, rogues, warriors, and pallies, and switch to molten armor against other mages or when bursting down your target. Finally, let's go over some of the spell combos for Frost. I've already shown you while casting Ice Lance against a target that isn't frozen is a bad idea. So, with that in mind, the first rule of Mage Frost spec is
do not spam Ice Lance.
The second rule about Mage Frost spec is
do not spam Ice Lance.
And the third rule is, you know what, I can't think of anything clever to follow those 2 up, so let's just say something along the lines of learning from your mistakes, or if anything, it's just a game, have fun. Those would probably be the top 2 contenders for rule number 3. The point I'm trying to get across here is that I see a lot of mages get a target down to about 10% and then they lose it and just start spamming Ice Lance. They nerf their own damage because they get trigger happy or tunnel vision or whatever you want to call it, and it's this mistake that allows their opponent to make a comeback. Conversely, I've seen a lot of mages who get down to 10% HP, lose it, panic, and they start spamming Ice Lance. So keep that in mind, because as a Frost Mage, keeping your cool, no pun intended, will make all the difference in PvP. Since I'm limited to 15 minutes here on YouTube, I've created the following charts to illustrate what I feel to be the most effective spell combinations for Frost. Feel free to pause the video now, or come back to this after you're finished watching. That pretty much covers the academics. In conclusion, I feel that covers probably 90% of everything there is to know about Frost spec. The other 10% is really highly situational tactics. I'll read up in the comments below and see if there are any questions I can answer in a follow-up video. The next tutorial will be on Fire spec. Again guys, give me some time. I've got a full-time job IRL and the hours are pretty killer, but with the economy the way it is, I'm just grateful I'm getting a paycheck. The last word on this video is that it's just a guide to help those who want it. I wouldn't assume to tell anyone how to play or that what they do differently from me is stupid. I wish everyone the best of luck in game and in IRL. Above all, have fun, enjoy the game, and enjoy life. Until next time, stay frosty.